Thank you, Courtlaine. Thank you, Laura, for your wonderful support, and great to be here with Kaira Jewel and with George and with all of you. The theme of the talk and the meditation and the session today is of being a bodhisattva in these times, the times that we're living in. And just from the beginning, just to say a bodhisattva just simply means a being of awakening, someone who's committed to their own waking up, their own freedom, and the freedom of all beings. So I'll be coming to talk about the role of the bodhisattva, kind of the archetype within the Buddhist tradition, and hopefully making it really relevant to our lives. Excuse me. That it can seem like, you know, it's a strange word, it's kind of a foreign word, and not a familiar word for most English speakers. And yet I think it's a very, very powerful archetype, really, of kind of sense of intention that each of us can cultivate. And I think it's particularly relevant in the times that we're living in. And I don't need to tell anyone here that we're living in quite extraordinary times. And I'd like to just highlight 4 kind of main areas where I think things are extraordinary. They're not the, you know, if there ever is a kind of a normal, they're outside of the normal. And the first one to highlight is just the world, all of us are living in the midst of this pandemic. We're a worldwide pandemic. Nothing that any of us have experienced or known in our lives. And in fact, nothing like this has been known for 100 years, going back to 1918, the worldwide influenza epidemic, pandemic. And we've seen the impact here in the United States. 120,000 people have died. Worldwide, it's coming to almost 500,000 people died. Huge economic impact, social impact on all of our lives. I think everyone probably here has been affected, you know, in terms of how your day-to-day life is by the pandemic. Maybe some, maybe a few have been affected financially in terms of work, in terms of business, etc. Huge impact on everybody. Here in the US, 40 million people have applied for unemployment benefits in the last 2-3 months. Tens of millions are still out of work, and there's no clear end in sight. So this is, you know, in this way, this is an extraordinary time. It's something that I think we're all kind of connected with, we're all familiar with. But when we're in the middle of it, it may not be always kind of easy to kind of sense, well, what is this that we're going through? So I want to name these few things. So that's the first one, just this pandemic that's affecting everyone worldwide, and in different ways, of course. The second is really something a little more recent. I mean, recent in terms of the way it surged up. And that is really the uprising for racial justice here in, you know, beginning obviously here in the US. Hundreds of thousands of people on the streets protesting after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And I think what's really, you know, what's sadly true, as we all know, is that this is one more killing of an African-American man by the police, men and women by the police. But what's different, I feel, is that something seems to have shifted here, something quite important. One is just the breadth and the continuity of the protests going on all around the country over 3 weeks after that killing. And then there's been more recently other killings, you know, particularly Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, Georgia. But there's still this incredible energy, and that energy has actually led to change, which is very different from earlier times. That you know, in many places there's a bans on chokeholds. We see all of the many statues coming down of white supremacists and Confederate leaders and generals, etc. Changes in policy. Legislation still to come to fruition, but in Congress, and some of it quite significant and promising, and the protests worldwide. The impact, the breadth of the protests, the spread, the duration. Something is happening here, and you know, one of the things, you know, a constant has always been with these killings, the anger, the grief, the rage, the different emotions in the African American community. And what seems to be different this time is really the diversity and the breadth of the response. There's something changing, and I hope it's going to lead to real change, but something changing among white people. I see it in our own suburban neighborhood, 750 people out on the streets with banners of Black Lives Matter, and small places, rural areas, you know, say nothing of the international protests in Berlin and Paris and London and Sydney. It's tapped into something that I think is real. I mean, I feel is real, and I hope will lead to very significant change. So we're in the middle of this as well. And again, you know, Court Lane and I and others were involved in a webinar to get support for Wisconsin in the upcoming election, grassroots organizing there. And Van Jones, a political commentator many of you will know, talked about how we're in the middle of this awakening. He says it's a miracle. It's an awakening, a real awakening. It's the word that used by President Barack Obama just the other night. He says we're in an awakening. Something is happening here. We don't necessarily have a name for it at this time, just as we didn't have a name for the civil rights movement when it was the civil rights movement until later. So this is another area that's really critical, that in some ways I think is extraordinary. A third one I want to touch on is climate change. We're not hearing very much in these last few months, for obvious reasons, about climate change because of, you know, these other issues coming to the fore. But it's clearly it's the issue that's going to affect our lives, our children, our grandchildren, and down through the generations. Scientists talk about a kind of a window we may still have of perhaps 10, 15 years, where if we don't make dramatic changes, the actions we've already taken to put CO2 into the atmosphere, it's going to reach a tipping point. And so we're again in this area of the climate, our planet. We're at this place where really profound questions are being asked of us collectively and us individually. How will I respond to this? How do I respond to around the issues being raised around racial justice? How do I respond to all that's going on around the pandemic? And these issues are affecting everyone, obviously some more immediately in the United States, but affecting everyone, I think, worldwide in different ways. And the final one I wanted to touch on is, you know, that this year is profoundly important decisions are going to be made about, you know, who will be the next president, who will control the Senate, the House of Representatives in the US. And even though for people outside of the US, it may be more indirect, the impact will be very, very real for everyone in the world who wins, you know, who wins this next election. And I think it can be said without hyperbole that really the American experiment, this experiment in democratic government that's been going now for 244 years, really is in the balance. I think, again, without hyperbole, I think it can be fairly said that democracy and the rule of law are at stake in who wins this next election. Not to say, you know, even if it goes in what I think and probably most of us here, or maybe all of us here, think would be a good direction, that everything is hunky-dory. Clearly it's not. But there's something about the continuity of the cruelty and the maladministration of these last few years, that if it goes to another term will have profound effects. There's a commentator, many of you may be familiar with, Steve Schmidt, a Republican, longtime Republican, who says that this is the most important, most consequential election since 1864. And you remember history, 1864 was really the last year of the US Civil War. So an important decision in that election. And he's saying that this is more important than any other election since that time, in that last 150 years. So all of this just to really lay the kind of the groundwork, the stage to say, if ever there was a time in our lifetimes that called for our compassionate, caring, and courageous engagement, I think this is the moment. If ever there was a moment, this is the moment. And what I want to share, kind of shift to, is to say, firstly, that it's essential, and this is kind of an underlying theme of this whole program that we're doing together, that it's essential that we engage, that we be involved. We can't be bystanders, you know, that we're not kind of playing our role if we think, oh, you know, life will go on. You know, we have a role to play. Each of us has a role to play. We need to engage, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't perpetuate division, conflict, and separation. You know, if we go into our engagement with what's going on with the energy of, you know, we're right, they're wrong, we're good, they're bad, you know, we just need to defeat the enemy, then we're going to just keep reproducing the suffering that's been going on for generations, for centuries, for millennia, really. We have to kind of bring an end to that. That division. We need to obviously take sides in terms of what's right and what's just, but not demonize others, not turn others into the enemy. We have to act with compassion and with wisdom. And where the Buddhist teachings, I think, can provide really profound support for us, you know, whoever we are and whatever our tradition and whatever our, you know, beliefs or religion or spiritual practice or whatever. I think the archetype that the Buddhist teachings provide of the Bodhisattva, a being, someone who's committed to alleviating suffering, the suffering of others, and engaging in wise and compassionate action. As I mentioned, Bodhisattva, 2 words in Pali, Bodhi meaning awakening, and Sattva meaning being, a being committed to awakening. In the Buddhist tradition, the Bodhisattva has been seen to be, you know, this real kind of selfless, somebody who's selfless, who's completely committed to compassion and to healing suffering. And sometimes it can seem, the ideal of the Bodhisattva can seem very lofty. Here's the one version of the Bodhisattva vow. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to eradicate them all. The gates of the Dharma are limitless. I vow to enter them all. The Buddha's way is inconceivable. I vow to attain it. So it's this kind of this sense of this extraordinarily aspirational kind of goals, you know, to free all beings and from suffering. And it comes out also in the wonderful text of Shantideva's view, kind of teachings around the Bodhisattva. He's an 8th century Indian philosopher and teacher, Shantideva. He said, "May I be a protector to the helpless, a guide to those traveling the path, a boat to those wishing to cross over, or a bridge or a raft. May I be land for those requiring it, a lamp for those in darkness. May I be a home for the homeless and a servant for the world." So we can, you know, think of that, of this kind of incredible compassion, generosity, caring. But I like to think in our time in somewhat more kind of a somewhat more modest way, perhaps a little, I don't know, realistic is the word, but something that we can all easily, perhaps not so easily, but we can all aspire to. And that is really, a bodhisattva is anyone who consciously and intentionally wishes and acts for the benefit of others and the benefit of all beings, without making separation of saying, oh, I care for you, but not for you, this group, but not for that group. That has that sense of kind of boundlessness, of wanting to benefit all beings. And I think we can be inspired by bodhisattvas from many, many different traditions. You know, obviously within the Buddhist tradition, we have wonderful examples in the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, this kind of selflessness, the willingness to be compassionate to all, including the Chinese authorities who's harmed, so much harmed and caused suffering to the people of Tibet. I think of, and yet he keeps his heart open in compassion to them and to all beings. I think of, obviously, of Thich Nhat Hanh, the amazing, incredible role he's played for more than 60 years from the 60s, but his whole life really, of being engaged, be caring about the suffering of the world, wanting to heal the suffering. But we can also think of people from other traditions. You know, I think of, you know, Nelson Mandela in his prison cell on Robben Island in South Africa, you know, committed to engaging in dialogue, in forgiveness, from a place of really working with his own heart and mind to let it be open to the goodness of even of those who are causing suffering, causing oppression. You think of Martin Luther King in the United States in the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, John Lewis, who's still here and still an inspiration to us, and so many others who provide an example of this selfless, compassionate engagement in the world, wanting to free themselves, but also wanting to help free all beings. Seeing, as Milarepa, the great Tibetan sage, said, long accustomed to contemplating compassion, I have forgotten all difference between myself and others. Long accustomed to contemplating compassion, I've forgotten all difference between myself and others. That's obviously somewhere, you know, to aspire to, because most of us are not quite at that place yet in our own lives and our own practice. And so we can, I think, envision ourselves as bodhisattvas, as cultivating compassion and exploring how we can engage wisely. And it won't be the same for everyone. For some, it may be out protesting for Black Lives Matter. For others, it might be getting out the vote in the elections. For others, it might be much more kind of personal, as a therapist, as a healthcare worker, or in our own families, trying to consciously bring compassion into our lives and into our relationships. So the invitation I would bring to each one of us is to think about your own life, where you are right now, and how, given your own context, your own situation, because this isn't a kind of one size fits all cookie cutter approach. It's really looking at our own lives and saying, what is it I can do? How can I serve? How can I be helpful? How can I help alleviate the suffering of the world and help in the healing of that suffering? And I want to kind of move towards a conclusion, sharing some reflections, a reflection from Jack Cornfield, who, wonderful teacher, great role he's played in bringing the teachings from Asia and, sharing them in language and ways that we can, that's possible for, many, many people here to connect with. He talks about, in his book, The Wise Heart, he talks about 3 qualities of a bodhisattva. So we could think of this in terms of our own engagement, our role as a bodhisattva. He says, first, the bodhisattva acknowledges and accepts the truth of their situation. So we start where we are. He says they face the truth. They turn towards the difficulties and shine the light of understanding on them. So we take our own truth, our own experience and the experience of our world and shine the light of understanding, accepting what's true right now. It may not be what we want to be happening. We might wish we had a different president, but this is where we are right now. How do I act from here? Secondly, she or he works to find peace within themselves by engaging in practices to let go of painful and afflictive states, greed, hatred, anger, blame, all of these kind of unwholesome states, to let go of those and develop positive states like compassion, love, equanimity, generosity, gratitude. So abandon what's unskillful and cultivate the good, cultivate wholesome, beautiful states of heart and mind. So that's the second quality. And the third is the bodhisattva, and this is the kind of the invitation. The bodhisattva envisions actions and a path of liberation for themselves, their community, and their world. So it's this envisioning, thinking, what can I do? How can I serve? How can I be, a part of this path of healing? And committing to working for those ends. As Jack says, envisioning has enormous power. With our vision and imagination, we can help create the future. Envisioning sets our direction, marshals our resources, makes the unmanifest possible. So you think of Nelson Mandela in his prison cell, of how that vision of talking to his jailers and then the authorities of the apartheid system, and thinking, envisioning, how can we move from this system of oppression towards a democratic system? How we have that vision of how to do that? Or how, for Dr. Martin Luther King, how engaging in protests, in getting people out to vote under the Jim Crow laws, how these actions can be part of a vision to change policy, change laws, so that we create a more an equal, a fair and a just society. So I want to finish off with that reflection and to move into a meditation and a reflection, so that you'll be invited to kind of deepen that reflection, perhaps on your own intention. So take a moment, take a few moments to just settle into a comfortable posture. You might close your eyes if that's comfortable. Let your back be straight. Maybe invite the shoulders to relax. Let your hands rest comfortably in your lap or on your knees or thighs. Just connect with your breathing. Be dropping your attention down out of the thinking mode, down into the body. Feel your body in contact with the surface beneath you. And just notice what's present for you right now. Maybe you notice an area of tension in your body. And you could just let your awareness come to that area and invite it to soften. Maybe the shoulders, maybe there's tightness there. Breathing into that area. Maybe the belly, maybe the muscles in the stomach are clenched. Just inviting the belly to relax, be at ease. Just letting the body be as relaxed as it can be right now. And just as a way of helping calm the body and the mind, you might let your breath deepen. Consciously invite the breath to be deeper. Nice deep in breath. Filling the chest and filling the lungs and releasing, letting go on the out breath. Long, slow out breath. Take a few of these longer, deeper breaths. This can help us to calm the body and the mind a little bit more. Like you're inflating a balloon and then releasing in a relaxed way, just letting go, releasing on the out breath. And you could invite in a quality of calm as you breathe in and as you breathe out. You could say that word silently to yourself, calm or peace, as you breathe in, breathe out. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. So inviting a sense of ease, of relaxation. And in your own time, just letting the breath come back to its natural rhythm. Settling into being here. And you might, as another very simple way of inviting a calming of the body and the mind, invite a smile to your face. If it's helpful, you could think of a loved one or dear friend or a pet, child or a grandchild, someone who easily makes you feel joyful, happy, at ease. Just inviting that smile, and the smile sends a message to our brain, to our nervous system, that we can be at ease. So if it's helpful, just inviting that smile, inviting a sense of ease, letting the smile come down into the body, into the heart area. Just relaxing into being here. And just allow whatever is arising for you to come and to go in its own time. If it's helpful, letting the breath be a kind of an anchor for your attention. That's resting. Just letting whatever comes, come. Meeting it with kindness, with acceptance, without judgment. And as you sit in a relaxed and comfortable way, as comfortable as you can be right now, you might turn your attention to some of the reflections that I shared. Just this time that we're living in right now. Just notice how you're holding all that's going on as you just let it come into your awareness. Maybe there's some tightness or resistance. Maybe it might feel a lot to hold. If you can, just make space for whatever's coming up for you. If you think about this time that we're living in, all of these elements I shared, and many more too, and your own situation, your own life, your work, your family, community, just feeling yourself in the midst of your own life right now at this time. And in this way that kind of Jack Cornfield presented or presents in his book, The Wise Heart, of these three qualities of opening to the truth of our situation, turning towards the difficulties. So for you right now, just turning towards whatever's true, whatever you're experiencing, and see if you can make space for whatever is here, with kindness, with acceptance, without wishful thinking, just accepting that this time, this moment is like this. And just notice what you're seeing, what's coming up for you as you turn the light of understanding on your experience, your situation. And the second quality of finding peace within yourself, by letting go of any holding, any clinging, any resistance, just letting it all come and go in its own time, without judgment, without resistance. And cultivating the qualities that can help you be as fully here as you can be. Kindness towards yourself and your experience. Awareness, mindfulness, opening to what's here. Equanimity, this quality of balance, of evenness, of steadiness of heart and mind. Compassion towards yourself and the difficulties or suffering that you're experiencing. Compassion towards the world, towards the suffering of the world. and wisdom, insight. This sense of what's, if anything's becoming clear about a direction, about things you could do, ways you could engage. And turning towards the third quality of envisioning actions and a path of liberation, of freedom for yourself, your community, your world. What will serve your own freedom, your own well-being, your own awakening, letting go of suffering? What will help others free their hearts, heal their suffering? Just opening to whatever comes up for you, whatever's arising. And we don't have to save the whole world. If we can put our grains of sand in to help heal the suffering of the world. As Mother Teresa said, we can't all do great things, but we can do small things. We can all do small things with great love. And this may be our greatest gift, to do what we can with great love. And I finish with a poem we shared at the beginning of the program of Martha Postlethwaite, her poem Clearing. She says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open, cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue." Taking your time, letting your awareness come back into the group. And thank you for your presence and your attention and practice.